So I've been wanting to do some more comprehensive videos on mental health for a while now, because it's been a while since I've done any videos on it. A lot of people have been asking for them, and I do get new viewers all the time, and they might not have seen my older videos on the topic. Also, just as I get older and I learn more things and I experience more things, I'll have more to say about a topic. So I think what I'll do is a couple different videos in the series. This one is going to be about bipolar disorder, which is what I suffer from, specifically bipolar type 2. I'm going to go through what it is, what the different types of it are, talk a bit about mania and depression, how treatment works, and I guess just kind of explain how it's different from something like major depression or that sort of thing. So I'm just going to kind of go through a bunch of information in this episode, and then next time I'll talk about my growing up with it, how it impacts me and that sort of thing. Just a disclaimer, of course, I'm not a doctor. This might not be as systematic as some people might explain it, but I'm trying to focus on explaining it in a way I think that the average person can kind of more understand. Being objective, but also kind of being subjective and trying to kind of make references to other things that people might get. So I do think it is important to talk about these things because, and I get that this is a cliche, one of the biggest problems people with mental illness have is that they just feel alone. They feel that they're uniquely bad, that they're a loser, that they're weak, that no one else has these issues, that they're just the worst person in the world. And they can just spiral down into these negative ways of thinking and just getting stuck in their own head. And I think it is important to be able to talk about these things and to have people who just say, yeah, I have these problems. And to know that you're not alone and that there's other people who in your daily life you might think are having no troubles whatsoever, but are actually going through a lot of the same issues you are. And I just think that's important, and that's an important part in the healing or the treatment process. So that being said, let's go into bipolar disorder, a life. So let's just start off with what is bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder is interesting because more so than most mental illnesses, it has a very strong genetic component to it. If somebody in your family, a mother, a grandmother, or grandfather has it, there's a much higher likelihood that you'll have it than a lot of other things. A lot of people develop depression, and there is a genetic component to that. But bipolar is much more strongly that way. I think it's also a bit more, just from my reading, biologically based, wherein there are some mental illnesses that are more biological. That is, there is a fundamental issue with your brain chemistry, and some things are more situational. So your mother or your wife or your a kid might die and you go into a depression. That doesn't necessarily mean you have any kind of brain chemical disorder or something else like that. It means you went through an extremely difficult time and you'll get into a spiral, and your depression will be real, but it's something that is hopefully temporary and that you can get over. And then there are people who have brain chemistry issues or other kind of mental permanent things on a biological level, and those are generally there for the rest of your life. You can manage them, but they're not really curable in the same way that severe anxiety from starting a new job or moving to a new city is. The person's life situation may not impact how they're feeling at all, which honestly is a big source of stress, and it creates kind of a sense of derealization or depersonalization. But we'll get into that more a bit later. So it's definitely one of the more genetically, biologically based disorders. An interesting thing about it is bipolar is positively correlated with intelligence. Now, some disorders like schizophrenia, I believe, are very heavily negatively correlated with intelligence. So the lower your IQ, the more likely you are to have schizophrenia. But I think OCD and bipolar are two that are correlated with higher IQs, and they tend to be overrepresented among very high achieving people, Often people who are very creative, they're disproportionately have bipolar disorder. So what is it exactly? Bipolar disorder is characterized between a cycling between two, or I would say two and a half different mood states. There is a manic or a high period, a depressive or low period, and a mixed period. And then sometimes people will experience a fairly normal emotional range, sometimes for the majority of the time. So, what a manic phase is I imagine how it would feel to be on like cocaine or meth or something. Basically, your body is completely just flooded with energy. Your brain is going a mile a minute. You feel incredibly agitated, impulsive. Your anxiety and fear just seem to be completely repressed. And well, I mean, as it sounds, you go manic. Now, there's two different types of mania. There is full on mania, which is what people with bipolar type 1 have, and hypomania, which is people who have bipolar type 2 have. Now, bipolar type 1 and full on mania is much more extreme. And this often will include psychotic symptoms, like seeing things that aren't there, experiencing things that aren't there, magical thinking. Generally speaking, megalomania is an important part of it. If you want someone who I think is very obviously bipolar and kind of exemplifies what manic behavior is, Kanye West, I think, is a very good example of this. Because if you notice, whenever he's manic, he will just post insane stuff. It'll go through phases of thinking that he's like a god, or just make radical changes to his personality or to his lifestyle, and just do all kinds of stuff like that. Now, the issue with people in a manic phase is because they feel almost like a god and a lot of their inhibitions are repressed. It's very common for people to do incredibly reckless and stupid things when they're manic that can often ruin their lives. Kind of the least of it is when you're manic and your brain's flying like 1,000 miles a minute, you get very agitated with other people. You feel that they're dumb, that they're screwing around with you. There's often kind of psychotic elements to it where they're invading like your mental quarantine or your mental space, and every little thing that they do or don't do can really irritate you. So people who go manic will sometimes go through periods where they will just get into fights with everybody they know. I only suffer from hypomania, but back before I was properly medicated, this would used to happen to me, where I would get incredibly irritated, aggressive, and self-absorbed. And I would just, if I was interacting with anyone, I would just start a fight with them. I would try to find something that I could insult them on or call them out on or something like that. It often leads to people doing very violent stuff. Stupid stuff like driving a car very recklessly. I don't just deciding to go skydiving. You're just on this constant, I don't know if it is dopamine, but it feels like a constant dopamine rush, and you just have no self-control whatsoever. Now, in particular, what tends to happen to people on this and how they normally will ruin their lives is they will just go on a spending binge. They will think that they are a genius, that the concept of like money, the concept of debt, the concept of living within your means just will completely vanish. And they will go out and spend like just all of their money. They'll go into massive debt, gambling, risky investments, drugs. Other risky things people will do is drugs, promiscuous sex, and the like. What makes it kind of different from a lot of other things, though, is people who are manic actually do perform at a higher level. Their brain is working on overdrive. And a lot of people who are bipolar when they're manic can do extremely creative things in a very short period of time. Sometimes manic people will be able to stay up for days at a time. It sounds counterintuitive, but they might go through a period of intense concentration where they can just sit down and write a book or do a painting or some other major project all in one sitting. And so it kind of presents differently compared to something like maybe ADHD. And a lot of people do find it very pleasant because it is euphoric, kind of this euphoric period, but also you are actually productive in it. Like you might just be depressed for a prolonged period of time and then you get manic and then you clean your entire house, you do all your taxes, and you just get a whole bunch of stuff done in a more efficient and effective way than normal. So that's mania. So hypomania is the lesser version of that. And so how bipolar type 2 works is bipolar type 1 cycles between mania and depression. The depression I think is about the same as in bipolar type 2, but mania is much more extreme and it's much more of it. I don't know the exact amount, but in bipolar type 1, it might be like 30% manic, 30% depressive, 30% fairly even. Whereas in bipolar type 2, it's like 20% hypomanic, like 60% depressive, 20% normal, or something like that. It's harder to diagnose because it tends to present just as being normal major depression. And hypomania can often just seem as the person being normal or having a good day or something like that. It can be very difficult to diagnose, but it's very important that it is correctly diagnosed. So, hypomania, what is it like? I don't go through it that often, maybe about 10% of the time or so, but it feels like a lesser version of how people describe mania. I feel a huge burst of energy, a lot of motivation to do things. My brain's going a mile a minute. I get extremely productive. Sometimes when I'm doing like essays or whatever for school, I'll just stare at the screen and then I'll just like, I generally don't procrastinate that much, but I'll just have trouble even getting started. And then I'll be going through a hypomanic period and I'll just write the entire paper in one day. And it'll be better quality than if I was doing it over a prolonged period of time. Less need for sleep is part of it. Like it's if I'm hypomanic, I might just go clean the entire house or something like that. So it's a lot of the time, particularly if you're a depressive person who has a lot of issues, getting yourself up to do things is generally speaking very pleasant. Now, the dark side of it is it makes you extremely irritable. I know back before I was properly medicated, whenever I was going through a hypomanic phase, I would just get extremely aggressive and cantankerous and develop a sense of self-centeredness and entitlement. That is, I would think the world was about me, that whenever something didn't go right, it was a personal attack against me, that I was paranoid that the people around me were conspiring against me. If I got into talks with people, my heartbeat would just go a mile a minute, and I just kind of completely lose my mind to rage. And it would lead to a lot of bad interpersonal interactions. It's just, once again, it's a lot of that can just present as normal interpersonal issues, and most of the time it does. But sometimes it does, if someone's going through a particularly bad hypomanic period, they can do a lot of crazy stuff and a lot of bad things, and they can do a lot of things that people do when they're bipolar, when they're full manic, like spend money. I used to post back when I had my like IRL Facebook account. I'd post probably unwise things on it. I get into fights with people online. Just things like that just seem like a good idea. Ironically, though, or maybe not ironically, but at the same time, if I was playing an online game or something, I would get much, much better at it when I was hypomanic. Like I would just be able to focus, my reaction times would be better, and stuff like that. So that's the one, that's the mania part. And I focus on that a lot because I think most people have a pretty decent idea of what depression is like. So that brings us to kind of the third portion, which is the mixed state, which is probably, I'm sure there's worse experiences mentally, But to me, this is by far the worst. So this is when, generally speaking, you're transitioning from one state to the other, and you experience both at the same time. You're both depressive and manic at the same time. So that presents as basically extreme dysphoria. And I think this is, generally speaking, where bipolar people kill themselves. Because you have all the negativity about depression, the self hatred, the desire to harm yourself, the feeling of worthlessness, but you have that with basically cocaine, crack injected into your veins. So a lot of the time, depressed people don't kill themselves because they're too lazy or sluggish or can't like get themselves together to do it. But in a mixed state, no, your mind's flying a mile a minute. Um, all the negative issues that you have with depression, like the ideas that the world's against you, the ideas that people hate you, are magnified. And it can take on psychotic symptoms too. So it's not just that you feel like people are against you, you will actually believe there's a real conspiracy against you, or you will think that they're like demons or something who are trying to infect your mind or drag you to hell or something like that. You'll go into full on psychotic episodes. So it's this combination of megalomania, extremely high energy and being very impulsive, with having an incredibly dysphoric view of reality. And it is not fun. It is an absolutely horrible state to be in. And I think that's probably when most people kill themselves, because they have both the negativity of depression, but also the urge to act. And a conclusion that often comes together when you combine extreme self centeredness with extreme depression is a belief that you're too good for the world. And that you should just remove yourself from it. Once again, does this stuff sound rational? Probably not, but that's mental illness for you. Is a lot of the time the person is not behaving rationally or is not feeling rationally, and you kind of have to look at it within the context of their situation. So that brings us to treatment. So the interesting about bipolar disorder is it can't be treated by just antidepressants. So, generally speaking, people, particularly if they have bipolar type 2 and they go to a doctor, a psychiatrist, or psychologist, is they'll say, I'm depressed. Because if you're hypomanic and you're completing assignments in a day and you're feeling like you're on top of the world and you're cleaning your house and stuff like that, if you're not getting into an interpersonal problem or doing anything reckless during that particular episode, it feels great. It doesn't feel like it's a problem. So a lot of the time people go to doctors because of the depressive phases. Also, mania is just not very common in a lot of other in basically any other mental illness. So it's less likely that people will be able to even identify it, just because it's pretty obvious. Like, people understand what depression is. Mania is something completely different. So there's a variety of different antidepressants people can take that affect different brain chemicals. But the three main ones are serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. Now, there's some others like GABA, or even just things like thyroid function or testosterone. But when it comes to psychiatric drugs, most of them, at least when it comes to antidepressants, affect these three. Just kind of a side note, because most people don't really know about that. So when you hear about an SSRI, something like Prozac or Luvox or Paxil or Cipralax or something like that, that is an SSRI. That is a serotonin uptake reinhibitor, which focuses on things like compulsion, memory, obsession. The downside is they can be a little bit sedating, and they can cause weight gain because they're more of kind of a sedating drug. Norepinephrine, there's one antidepressant that is an NDRI, that is norepinephrine and dopamine, which is bupropion or Wellbutrin, that affects both of that. I'm not sure. I think that like something like Ritalin would also be in this category. And then there is some SNRIs, which is serotonin or epinephrine uptake reinhibitors. But anyways, regardless, any medication that targets one of these, if given to someone with bipolar, will not treat what it's supposed to do. It will, maybe for a little while, it might make the person's mood a little better on the whole. But what it does, because of the difference in brain chemistry, is it will destabilize them and make them go insane. It will cause rapid cycling. It'll cause more mixed states. For some people, if it's particularly a strong one, it'll trigger prolonged manic periods. It is a very bad decision or a bad choice to treat somebody with bipolar disorder with just an antidepressant monotherapy. It just makes the person go insane. I know I've had that. The times I've only been on an antidepressant, it would help with my depression, but it would also destabilize me and make me kind of lose it. So that's another issue that happens, particularly if you're someone who's bipolar type 2. You're mostly depressed, but if you only take an antidepressant, it will destabilize you and make you kind of lose it. So how do you get past this? How do you deal with this destabilization? Well, there's something called a mood stabilizer. So there's a bunch of different ones. There's carbamazepine or Tegretol. There's lithium. There's lamotrigine or Lamictal. I think there's a couple others, but those are kind of the three. Oh, valproic acid. I forget what its other name is. But there's something called a mood stabilizer. So what a mood stabilizer does is what it sounds like. It evens out your mood cycles. So if for instance you're bipolar type 2, or sorry, bipolar type 1, and you go between, like, with 10 being full mania and 1 being suicidal depression, you'll go between 1 and 10. If you take a mood stabilizer, then your range might sink to 3 to 7, or maybe even a bit less than that. You cycle less frequently, and you spend more time in kind of a normal state. Also, what that will do is that'll prevent in a lot of cases, your antidepressant from destabilizing you and sending you into a spiral. Now, it kind of depends a bit as to what your issues are with regards to what mood stabilizer you take. So lithium is interesting in that it is not a drug. It's not a chemical. It's a salt. And it's, I think, the only medication that actually consistently reduces suicidal ideation. Actually, historically, in areas that have high concentrations of lithium in the drinking water, suicide rates are lower. So that's kind of like the classical one. The downside to it is lithium has a therapeutic level. There's not really more or less lithium. There's correct level lithium and not correct level lithium. Below a certain level, it will not do anything, and above a certain level, it will be toxic. And it can also cause some other issues. I think it causes water retention because it's basically a salt. It can cause sluggishness and some stuff like that. But it's kind of, I think, the strongest one, particularly when it comes to addressing manic phases. It's very effective at doing that. The thing is, what's kind of interesting is you have to get regular blood tests to make sure that the level of it in your bloodstream is healthy. Then you'll also have something like valproic acid, which is a mood stabilizer, but it's much more focused on manic episodes. So whereas lithium might reduce it to, I don't know, a scale of 3 to 7, what valproic acid might do is the person's range will go from 1 to 10 to 2 to 6. Or something like that. It's more effective for that. And once again, like, not everyone with bipolar is the same. Some people are more manic, some people are more depressive, that sort of thing. And then there's lamotrigine or lamictal, which is the one I take, and that is primarily for bipolar type 2 people, and it functions more of an antidepressant. So just going back to the scale again, that might raise the floor to like 3 or 4, but only reduce the top to like 9 or 8. I'm just making these numbers up just to give you kind of some idea of what I'm talking about. So when you combine that with something else, it just smooths the person's mood out a lot. The peaks are lower and the lows are higher. I think it also reduces, generally speaking, the amount of mixed states that people have and a lot of the psychotic delusions. The issue is, as with all psychiatric drugs, there's always trade offs. Sometimes there aren't that many side effects, and sometimes there are a lot of side effects. This isn't necessarily even the drug company's fault. It's just that we don't entirely understand how a lot of this stuff works. So, two people might take the same antidepressant, the same level, and one person it might work very well for. They might have no side effects. The other person it might completely screw up. And you're dealing with a lot of brain chemicals and stuff like that. But this is true for just about any medication. Some medications will have an extremely negative impact on one person, and some will not. And I will say this for drug companies, just to be fair. When you look at a list of side effects and it has just like 20 different ones, that is often where it comes from, is sometimes people are just sensitive to it. Like appetite is a very good one. Like for some people, Prozac makes them super hungry and they gain weight. Some people it kills their weight. Everybody just kind of reacts different to it. Sometimes different drugs of the same class that are very similar, like Prozac versus Cipralax, which both have a similar mechanism of action, one of them might work very well for someone, one of them might not work very well for someone. And then sometimes things will lose their efficacy over time. So something I do see, sometimes people will try one medication, it won't work, and they'll immediately give up. Or they'll take lithium or something and they can't deal with the side effects, and then they just won't take it. The antidepressant I currently take with my lamotrigine is Prozac, and the side effects I find with it is extreme dryness of the mouth. Is the main one. So my eyes tend to get dry and my mouth tends to get dry. If you ever notice that I drink a lot of water when I'm on stream, that's the reason. Is my mouth is just dry a lot of the time, which is not pleasant, but compared to the alternative, it's not that bad. I've taken things that have way, way worse side effects than that. I tried taking quintiapine or Seroquel for a while as a sleep aid, which is an antipsychotic that's used off label as a sleep aid. And the lowest dose of that would make me like pass out into coma sleep for 12 hours. So a little bit of a dry mouth isn't really that big an issue. Once again, I would have other negative health effects if I was not taking it. So in addition to this, as with most mental illnesses, there is normally a therapeutic aspect to it. That is dialectic behavioral theory, therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, life skills, group therapy, stuff like that. Now, my personal opinion is oftentimes they have to be combined. One of the reasons for medication is to get you to the point where therapy can work. Because if you just want to kill yourself 24/7 and you have zero energy, the person can be the best therapist in the world and it might have absolutely no impact. I think this is especially true with people who have situational depression. Some medication can just get them out of the spiral, get them out of the funk, for a lack of a better term, and let them kind of get back to a more normal way of looking at the world. The thing, though, to keep in mind with something like bipolar is, because at least from my understanding, it's more biological, regardless of the amount of therapy you get, you're probably going to be taking medication in one form or another for the rest of your life. Oftentimes people will think that they're doing better because their medication's making them feel better. and then they will go off it and they'll just go completely insane and do all kinds of stupid shit and ruin their lives. I also think it does a lot of mental like damage to your brain when you're not on medication, you're rapidly cycling, because going from one extreme to another I find is immensely stressful on your psyche, and I mean that, and on your body in a physical sense, because it's kind of like being in a sauna and then being thrown in like a puddle of ice water, like in a pool of ice water or something. It's just a very strong shock that is very unpleasant. But yeah, once you get the medication going, therapy can be helpful to help you kind of work through your intrusive thoughts, your bad thoughts, try to rewire your brain. It sounds cheesy, but it does actually work. For a while, it can just take a while to get things to sink in. Also, the problem with therapy is it just the type very differs from person to person. For some people, one type won't work and another one will. It's all a very inexact science, and the focus is more on getting people functional rather than curing a specific disease. Like if someone has cancer or a parasite or something, there is an end goal. There is something you're trying to treat and trying to deal with. When it comes to mental illness, this is often not the case. And it's trying to get the person functional and improving their quality of life. So, yeah, with some people with bipolar, they don't even really need therapy. They just need medication to control it, and then they can cope. Some people need life skills or some other things to help them make better use of their more settled mind. Once again, it's kind of just depends on the person. I found group therapy was the most effective, interestingly enough. I did CBT for a long time, and I didn't find it super helpful. Part of that was I was not on proper medication when I went through most therapy. And being like megalomaniacal and super angry and aggressive and thinking I know better than everybody is not conducive to good therapy results. It just leads to you arguing with the therapist or being belligerent or not taking advice or not being able to engage in the proper self-reflection and just blaming everybody else around you. So I do think therapy is good. I do think medication is good. I think a general issue, and maybe I'll kind of wrap it up with this, is people are often, I don't think, actively involved enough with their treatment. Like some doctors are very much, they don't want you to look things up on your own. But I think you have to look at your doctor, your psychiatrist as a partner, as a collaborative process where you should understand your medication, you should understand your mental illness, you should understand what might trigger something, what might, things you should avoid, things that you should seek out, what things kind of help you calm down. And I think it's important for you to be aware of these things and to try things on your own, like diet change or exercise change or sleep change or other things in coordination with your doctor. I'm not a doctor, but just doctors are not all knowing. Some of them just want to rush you out of the door. So it's very important that there's a sense of trust between them, you and them. And if you just think the person is a flake or they don't care or they don't know what they're doing, you should try to change the situation if possible, because doctors are not always right. Most of them are trying to do the best job they can and do care about their patients, but there are a lot of them who are lazy or ignorant. And as the patient, I think it's important for you to kind of be aware of that. So I guess we can say that this is kind of part one. Let's talk about bipolar disorder, what it is, what the different types are, what hypomania and mania and mixed states are and stuff like that. And then we'll get into, and maybe in the next video, kind of my experiences with it growing up, what it feels like and that sort of thing. So I hope you found the video interesting. I hope maybe you learned something. And if you're suffering from these issues, It helps you to kind of come forward and talk to your doctor about it. Or if you know somebody who's going through these problems, maybe you understand them a little bit better. But God bless everybody, and I'll talk to you all soon.